subscribe. In the dead of winter, an elderly man stepped outside his cabin and froze in disbelief. 3 German Shepherd dogs sat shivering in the snow, their eyes pleading for help. No one knew where they had come from or why they were there, but what he did next shocked everyone. Before we begin, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wind howled through the pine trees, carrying the bite of a cruel winter morning. Snow blanketed the ground in heavy drifts, sparkling beneath a pale grey sky. Inside a small wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, an elderly man named Walter stirred awake to the familiar creak of the floorboards and the faint crackle of a dying fire. Life out here was simple, though not easy. Walter lived alone. His days were spent chopping wood, tending the stove, and walking the snow-covered trails with nothing but his thoughts for company. He had grown used to the silence, the stillness of winter pressing in around him like a heavy quilt. But this morning, something felt different. Pulling on his coat and boots, Walter stepped outside, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. He paused on the porch, blanket in hand, expecting only the endless hush of the snowy woods. But then he heard it, soft whimpers carried on the wind. His brow furrowed. "Whimpers out here," he muttered. Walter squinted into the distance, and that's when he saw movement near the tree line, 3 dark shapes huddled together, shivering violently. At first, he thought they were wolves. But as they lifted their heads, his heart skipped. They weren't wolves, they were German shepherds, and they were begging for help. Walter gripped the railing of his porch, hardly believing his eyes. The 3 dogs staggered through the snow, their paws dragging as if every step were a battle. Their fur was caked with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath thick winter coats. They weren't wild animals at all, they were trained German shepherds, the kind used by police and military units. One of them let out a low whine, lifting a paw gingerly before collapsing into the snow. Walter's heart clenched. These weren't just strays, they were survivors. Collars, scratched and worn with tags nearly frozen solid, hung around their necks. Something terrible must have happened for them to end up here, miles from town, in the middle of a snowstorm, he thought. "Easy now," Walter muttered, trudging through the snow toward them. The dogs lifted their heads, ears twitching, but there was no aggression in their eyes, only desperation. They wagged their tails weakly, as if begging him to understand. Walter knelt beside the nearest one, brushing frost from its muzzle with his old hands. The dog pressed its head against his palm, shivering so violently it broke his heart. "Where on earth did you come from?" he whispered. Behind them, the untouched snow told a silent story, long trails of paw prints leading deep into the forest. Wherever these dogs had come from, it wasn't nearby, and the fact that they had made it this far meant only one thing: they were searching for help. Walter stood in the snow, staring at the 3 trembling shepherds. His cabin wasn't much, just enough firewood stacked to last the winter and a pantry stocked with modest rations. He lived alone, carefully saving what he had. Taking in 3 half-frozen dogs could stretch everything dangerously thin. But then one of the shepherds nudged his hand with its cold nose, eyes filled with pleading. Walter felt the weight of their trust, silent and desperate. He sighed heavily, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Lord, help me. I can't just leave you out here." Guiding them toward the cabin, Walter opened the door and motioned inside. At first, the dogs hesitated, paws hovering uncertainly at the threshold. Then, sensing his kindness, they stepped in one after another, collapsing on the rug near the stove. The heat made them sigh in relief, curling their frost-bitten paws beneath them. That afternoon, Walter shared what little food he had, scraps of bread, broth, and bits of dried meat. He watched them eat slowly, tails thumping weakly against the floor. For the first time in days, they weren't shivering. When a neighbor dropped by later and saw the dogs, he shook his head. "You don't know where they came from, Walter. They could be dangerous." Walter glanced back at the shepherds already dozing by the fire. Dangerous? No. These dogs weren't a threat, they were survivors. And for some reason, fate had led them straight to his door. Over the next few days, the shepherds began to regain their strength. Walter fed them carefully, wrapped their paws in old rags, and let them rest by the fire. But as they healed, he noticed troubling details. These weren't ordinary dogs. Each wore a heavy-duty collar, scratched and battered from use, with faint engravings, numbers and letters like an identification code. One bore a scar across his shoulder, the kind earned from service. Another startled at loud noises, snapping back into rigid focus as if still on duty. One morning, Walter stepped outside to gather wood and noticed paw prints leading away from the cabin into the dense woods. He followed them a short distance, snow crunching beneath his boots, until he found signs of struggle, broken branches, blood in the snow, and tire tracks half buried by the storm. His chest tightened. These dogs hadn't simply appeared by chance, they had come from somewhere dark, somewhere dangerous. Walter returned to the cabin, staring at the three shepherds curled near the fire. Their eyes met his, steady and loyal, silently urging him to uncover the truth. On the fourth day, the crunch of tires in the snow drew Walter to his porch. A police SUV rolled up the narrow path, lights flashing faintly against the white drifts. An officer stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat, eyes widening as he spotted the three shepherds peering from the doorway. "Thank God," the officer breathed. "We've been searching for them." He explained that the dogs were part of a K-9 unit caught in a deadly snowstorm while tracking a suspect in the mountains. Their handler had gone missing, presumed trapped, or worse. The dogs had trekked miles through the blizzard before finding Walter's cabin. Walter's heart pounded as he looked back at them. These weren't lost strays, they were heroes who had refused to give up. Their bodies bore the marks of frostbite, but their will to survive had carried them to safety. The officer knelt, stroking their fur as the dogs wagged weakly, tails thumping against the cabin floor. "They never stopped searching," he said softly. "Even when the storm tried to kill them, they kept going." Walter's chest tightened with awe. The shepherds hadn't just saved themselves, they had found him, and in doing so, changed everything. In the weeks that followed, the story spread far beyond the quiet mountain town. Newspapers called Walter a hero, though he simply shook his head. "I only did what anyone with a heart should," he said. Yet people couldn't stop talking about the image of an elderly man opening his home to three freezing K-9s when no one else was there to help. The shepherds were treated for frostbite and exhaustion, slowly regaining strength. But even when reunited with their unit, they often looked back toward Walter, their eyes soft with recognition. It was as if they remembered who had pulled them from the edge of death and given them warmth when they needed it most. Walter's lonely cabin was no longer so quiet. Visitors came often, wanting to shake his hand or hear the story firsthand. For him, though, the real legacy was simple: loyalty is never one-sided. If you were moved by this incredible story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.